Train Sim World 4, or the TSW series in general, is quite a mixed bag when it comes to the balance of its good and bad points. Most of the route choices are from the UK, USA or Germany, with not many exceptions at the time of uploading. See the video linked to in the top right corner for a review I made on a route that's outside the aforementioned trio. And although we have a decent amount of motive power in the game as of early June 2024, I think there's still plenty of room for more variety. Since Dovetail Games have pretty much quietly abandoned steam development in TSW, I'm not going to bother suggesting any steam locomotives in this video. Instead, 3 of the proposals are for diesel locomotives and 1 is for an electric locomotive, plus an honourable mention for 2 electric units. My honourable mentions are the Class 419 MLV and Class 4234 VEP in the Classic Network Southeast livery, since we currently only have one NSE painted train in TSW, and that's the Class 483. For context, the Class 419 MLV is a single-car electric unit designed for carrying luggage and parcels. So to me it's a bit like the electric version of the Class 128 or Class 129. 10 of these vehicles were built at Easterly Works between 1959 and 1961, then used to provide extra luggage capacity on the boat trains from London to Dover and Folkestone. They were capable of running on their own and hauling light loads or running with conventional electric multiple units, such as the Class 411 Force SEP, and for reference, the MLV designation is short for Motor Luggage Van. A unique aspect of the Class 419 is the presence of onboard batteries, which allowed the units to run over non-electrified sections of track for a short time, and the batteries could be recharged when the unit was back on the third rail. Indeed, there are some photographs on Flickr that show MLVs running past the end of the third rail at Folkestone Harbour. The MLVs had a reasonably long service life, and more information about their history can be found on the Southern Railway Email Group's website. They were gradually withdrawn between 1991 and 2004, with 8 of the 10 units surviving into preservation. Meanwhile, the Class 4234 VEP is a 4-car electric multiple unit, and 194 examples of this design were built between 1967 and 1974. For reference, the 4VEP designation is short for 4-car vestibuled electro-pneumatic brake, and vestibuled means that she has gangway connectors on the cab ends. The Class 423 looks very similar to the Class 421 Force SIG, albeit with doors next to every row of seats because they were designed for stopping and outer suburban services. For comparison, here's a 4 SIG alongside a 4 VEP. The 4 VEPs had a long service life, and could be found running commuter services in South London as well as regional services in Kent, Sussex and Hampshire, surviving well into the privatisation era. In the late 1990s, Connex South Central modified 19 of their 423s by declassifying the first class section and removing internal compartments, resulting in the units being redesignated as Class 423/9 or 4 VOP. The final Class 423 wasn't withdrawn until 2005, with their replacements being either Class 375 and 377 Electrostars or Class 444 and 450 Desiros, depending on what part of the network they were running in. As for what route I'd like to see the Class 419 and Class 423 units running on, I suggest the southeastern main line between Tunbridge and Dover Priory, plus the Folkestone Harbour branch. This section of the main line is around 47.8 miles long, and has intermediate stations at Paddock Wood, Marden, Staplehurst, Headcorn, Pluckley, Ashford, Western Hangar, Sandling, Folkestone West, and Folkestone Central. The line also features a long section of dead straight track between Tunbridge and the western side of Ashford, as well as the iconic Shakespeare Tunnel on the coastal section near Dover. If a Tunbridge to Dover Priory route was made for TSW, I would prefer to see it set in the late 1980s to match the Network South East livery on the trains, and this was also before the Channel Tunnel opened. These days, the high-speed line runs parallel to the classic third rail-equipped South Eastern Main Line between Dollins Moor and Ashford. My first suggestion in the main list is the Class 35 Hymec, one of the distinctive Western Region diesel hydraulic locomotives. Fans of the Railway Series books should recognise this locomotive, as this is the same class as D7101, also known as Bear, a diesel that appeared in the iconic Super Rescue story from the Enterprising Engines book. In real life, the Class 35 numbers only went as high as D7100, and incidentally, Enterprising Engines is one of the few RWS books of which I actually own a copy. 101 examples of this class were built by Bayer Peacock of Manchester between 1961 and 1964. The western region of British Railways was initially big on diesel hydraulic locomotives, and the Hymecs were intended for secondary passenger and freight duties. As for where the Hymec nickname came from, this was a combination of the words hydraulic and mechhydro, the latter being the type of torque converter, whatever that means, used in these locomotives. The prime mover was a Maybach MD870, built under licence by Bristol Siddeley Engines, producing 1,700 horsepower. The locomotives had a continuous tractive effort of 151 kilonewtons, or 33,950 pounds force, and could hit a top speed of 90 miles per hour, or 145 kilometers per hour. Along with other diesel hydraulic classes from the Western region, the Class 35s were deemed non-standard under the National Traction Plan of 1967. Despite receiving a TOPS classification, none of these locomotives ever actually carried TOPS numbers. For example, locomotive number D7064 never became 35064. Indeed, the 35s were very short-lived due to the aforementioned label as being non-standard. Despite not even being 20 years old, the Hymecs were all withdrawn between 1971 and 1975, but this wasn't the end for this class. Fortunately, 4 Hymecs have survived into preservation, and the survivors are D7017, D7018, D7029, and D7076. As for why I want to see the Class 35 in Train Sim World, it's because she could be an add-on for the West Somerset Railway. 2 of the preserved Hymecs, namely D7017 and D7018, are based on the WSR in real life, and they would supplement the Class 09, Class 33, Class 47, and Class 52 quite nicely. For reference, those are the 4 heritage diesel types that we can drive on the WSR and TSW. The next proposal is actually just another variant of a locomotive that already exists in the game, namely the Class 33 Crompton. 98 examples of this class were built by the Birmingham Railway Carriage and Wagon Company between 1960 and 1962. Between 1965 and 1967, 19 of them were modified for push-pull service by being fitted with jumper cables and high-level brake pipes. These modified Cromptons were designated as Class 33/1 under the TOPS system of 1968. In the 1960s, the South Western Main Line was electrified with a 750 volts DC third rail system, but only as far as Bournemouth. In order to provide a direct service from London Waterloo to Weymouth despite the lack of full electrification, powerful Class 432 4-rep EMUs would propel 1 or 2 unpowered 4-car sets, known as Class 438 or 4TC, from London to Bournemouth. Then the 4-rep would be uncoupled for the Class 33-1 to take the 4TC sets onto Weymouth, after which the diesel would then propel the train back to Bournemouth, where a 4-rep would be waiting to take the 4TCs back to London. Because we haven't got the 4-rep or 4TC in TS Classic, I've been using the Class 423 4-rep units for these scenes instead. As for why I want to see the Class 33-1, plus a 1970s era Bournemouth to Weymouth route in Train Sim World, it's because they would offer a very unique push-pull service with the 4TC sets, which were actually converted from standard Mark I coaches. The push-pull service past Bournemouth ended when the electrification was finally extended to Weymouth in the late 1980s, with the Class 442 Wessex Electric units taking over from the 4-rep, 4TC, and Class 33-1. Fortunately, 8 of the push-pull Cromptons have survived into preservation, including 33-108 Swordfish. The only electric locomotive in this list is the Alstom/Bombardier HHP-8. 21 examples of this design were built in 1991 and 2001, with 15 of them going to Amtrak, and the remaining 6 going to Maryland Area Regional Commuter, otherwise known as MARC. The HHP-8 is visually similar to the Acela Express power cars, albeit with a cab at both ends. As for why these locomotives were built in the first place, it's because Amtrak needed additional motive power for Northeast Corridor services after the electrification of the New Haven to Boston section. The line was also upgraded in preparation for the Acela trains, which were ordered at the same time as the HHP-8. These locomotives had a very short career with Amtrak due to their poor reliability. One of the issues was frequent wheel slip, and this was no doubt a result of the rather high power output. In the end, Amtrak decided to order the Siemens ACS-64 locomotives to replace both the HHP-8 and older AEM-7, thus creating a standardized fleet for locomotive-hauled NEC services. The last Amtrak HHP-8 was retired in February 2015, and all 15 initially went into storage in Wilmington, Delaware. Apparently, at least 2 HHP-8s have been converted into cab cars. Well, not exactly cab cars in the traditional sense, as a possible replacement for the much older ex-Metroliner cab cars. As for the MARC locomotives, I believe they're still in service on the Penn Line, a route from Washington DC to Perryville, Maryland that runs along the Northeast Corridor for part of its journey. MARC's locomotives were refurbished in 2017 and 2018, although I'm surprised that they're still in service given the recent arrival of the Siemens SC44 Chargers. If she was ever made for TSW, I think the HHP-8 could be an add-on primarily for Boston Sprinter, with some timetable mode services on New York to Trenton as well. I dare say the AEM-7 would be a more popular choice amongst Amtrak fans, but I prefer the more obscure stuff myself. If you want to learn more about the HHP-8 locomotives, then Amtrak Guy 365 has you covered. I'll include a link to the relevant Engines of Amtrak episode in the description. Last but not least, we have KiwiRail's DSG class diesel shunters, although KiwiRail was not their original operator. 24 examples of this center cab design were built by Toshiba of Japan between 1981 and 1983. Toshiba also designed the similar-looking DSJ class, of which only 5 were built in 1984 and 1985, but there are a number of differences between the DSG and the DSJ. Chief among them is the lack of a second prime mover in the DSJ. Essentially, the DSJ is just a shortened version of the DSG, albeit with an off-center cab and a radiator grille at only one end. Indeed, one day in January 2017, I saw a DSJ 4045 and a DSG 3074 coupled together in the Palmerston North yard. This photograph gives a good indication of the similarities and differences between the two classes. The DSGs have now had at least 5 operators throughout their lives, and they were one of the first classes where every single member has received the KiwiRail livery. These locomotives are powered by 2 Cummins KTA-1150L prime movers, which produce a combined power output of 940 horsepower. The locomotives can be driven conventionally, with the driver sitting in the cab, or by remote control. As such, the DSGs can be found shunting in places such as Te Rapa, Kawerau, Kinleith, Palmerston North, Wellington, Christchurch, and Te Mauru. Their top speed is only 60 km per hour, but this is still fast enough for the engines to run short-distance trips on the main line. Indeed, I remember seeing DSG 3033 running a Littleton to Middleton shunt when I was in Christchurch back in April 2023. Another South Island service hauled by DSGs is the Dunedin to Port Chalmers shunt. As for a route that could be made in Trainsim World for the DSG, I propose Napier to Hastings, even though that's pretty short at 24 kilometres, or 14.9 miles. In addition to the roughly 3 times a day services to and from Palmerston North, which are typically hauled by the DL class, KiwiRail also uses a DSG to run a twice-daily shunt from Napier to Hastings and back, serving the industrial complexes in Hastings and taking their products up to the port of Napier. I like this part of the line because of the charming coastal scenery north of Clive, and although the line briefly goes inland through central Napier, it rejoins the coast in the suburb of Ahuriri. And there you have it, 4 randomly selected locomotives, plus those 2 electric multiple units, that I'd like to see in Trainsim World, as unlikely as some of them probably are, proceeds to stare at the DSG. Even just seeing one of these engines in the game would be fine by me. And feel free to put your own motive power wishlist in the comments section.